is very convoluted. They're old habits. Those need to change. It's all about understanding the buyer behavior, discovering and validating that. So who is the customer, and what is the value that your product or service provides to that customer that incentivizes them to want to pay for it? That's what you need to do. So why I-Core and Lean Launchpad? I think that all of the agencies that offer SBIR and STTR awards now are embracing the I-Core approach. They may not call it I-Core, but all of them are using Lean Launchpad approaches. SBIR and STTR applicants who are participating, in particular in the National I-Core program, have a dramatically higher success rate at getting awards. And I actually don't know what that number is now. 3 years ago, when I participated in a National I-Core program as a mentor for a team, the number was 40%. And when I asked the NSF staff last year in October what the current number was, they said they were told that they could no longer make that number public because it had the appearance of providing preference to a group of participants. But they were willing to tell me that the number was now higher than it was when I had participated. So this works in these programs. So, commercialization used to be about writing a long, convoluted business plan. That's no longer the case. And I think that's encapsulated really well by a couple of quotes here. Steve Blank, who was one of the founders of the Lean Launchpad approach, said, "No business plan survives first contact with customers." And another one that I think is really good, this is from Brad Feld and Jason Mendelson at the Foundry Group in Boulder. Haven't read a business plan in over 20 years. Another way to think about this was expressed actually by Dwight Eisenhower. And he said, plans are worthless, but planning is everything. So writing a 30-page involved plan that locks things in stone isn't helping you. But planning, thinking about various approaches, thinking about options, thinking about paths is worth everything. So that when you experience a roadblock or a stumble, you know how you can react to it. So why Lean Launchpad? And this is a slide that comes from the National I-Core program. The vast majority of documented ideas fail in commercialization. Furthermore, even ideas that are backed by VCs primarily fail. We're going to make all the slides available to you, so don't worry about it.
And
I mean,
sorry, I just want to interject. We have seats in the front rows as well. I've just come to tell people we have a few
Yes.
seats. If you'd like to make yourselves comfortable.
Yeah, if anybody could just raise their hand if they're sitting next to an empty seat. Okay, so if so many commercialization ideas fail, what's behind that? Why are they failing? And you can look at different studies. Here, I'm going to show you two examples. Here's one, and the greatest single component is no market need. Down a little bit lower is ignoring customers. And to me, I sort of add those together, and that's saying you're making the wrong thing. So in the National I-Core program, you're expected to conduct, you're required to conduct 100 customer interviews. Those interviews in 7 weeks of the national program will answer these questions for you. So remember that number, 56% from this study. Here's another study. In this study, again, number one, building something nobody wants, 36%. If you add up 1, 3, 4, and 6, which are all, in my mind, related to building the wrong product, building something that nobody wants, you come up with 66%. That's pretty close to the other study. So you can find multiple studies, all of them that I've seen, suggest that number one is building the wrong product or building something that nobody wants. And as you add up the various options, they're pretty consistent in terms of the contributing factor associated with not understanding your customer, not listening. I'll also point out that another major contributor to failure is either not having the right team or having people in the wrong seats on the bus on your team. It's incredibly important to have the right people. But number one, not understanding your customer. So the I-Core process attempts to shift the curve. So if this is a graphical imagined representation of most companies failing, the idea is to shift the curve to the right, to increase the number of base hits and home runs, to increase success. So how do you do that? And the cornerstone to that, to address number one failure point, is define product market fit. And what we mean by that is understanding your customer, and I'm going to talk more about who the customer actually is, understanding their needs, pains, and issues, so that you can provide a defined value to that customer, something that they're willing to pay for. Remember always, and this is, it was really hard for me as a scientist when I started getting involved in business activities, and I see it as something that's very, very hard, particularly in technology businesses. Having great ideas in technology does not guarantee a successful product, let alone a successful business. So you have to think about the value of that product to your customer. And remember, although this may sound like you're up against insurmountable odds, and it may seem like when you go out, you're going to be hearing things you don't want to hear, the fact of the matter is you'd rather hear it early. You'd rather be able to change your product, change your service, pivot, so that you do provide value to a customer and you can be successful. So you're much better off discovering a problem early rather than making a product that nobody wants and having a store or a warehouse full of material that you can't sell. So, this is not basic research. It's all about the customer. It's all about the market. The customer is a person. So, in a few minutes, we're going to ask all of you to participate in this exercise with us. And we're going to ask you to define two things. One is your customer, and that customer is a person. It's not a company, it's not an agency, it's not an organization. Someone has to make the decision to buy your product. Who is that customer? And that customer is going to make that decision. They're going to be incentivized to buy your product because of the value that the product provides to them. Not because of a feature of the product, but because they gain some real value from the product. So a value is stated in the words of the customer. And I'm going to sound like a broken record about that, and you'll see why as we go on. Who is your customer? Again, it's a person, it's not an organization or a company, and what are the values? And it really helps, ultimately, and it's sometimes hard to get to this, but it really helps for those values to be quantifiable. For you to be able to say to the customer, our product doubles your manufacturing speed. Our product increases your sales by X percent. And that quantification is valuable for you, both selling your product to the customer, but also growing your business. Because your investors are going to want to know, do you provide a major impact? Do you provide a major value to your customer? Or are you just adding 1 or 2% that really is just lost in the noise? So ultimately, quantifying values is very important. So remember, the customer is always right. This is all about listening to the customer, learning from them, not selling your product at this stage. So the I-Corps program, both at our site here and the national program, requires participants to go out and conduct informational interviews. You're learning, you're asking questions, you're getting the customer and the other stakeholders associated with your business to talk. You're not selling your product or technology. You're using those interviews as you explore who you think the customer is and how they do business to understand the specific person who makes the buying decision. We're defining that individual as the customer. But there are other people in the ecosystem of your business. They're influencers, they're actual payers. So in a large organization, if you're selling into it, one person's going to make the buying decision, somebody else is probably going to be the end user. Those end users are going to influence the customer is going to place the order, the purchasing department's going to buy it. All those different people who interact with making your business, your product or service, a success. So you need to understand who the customer is, you need to understand their pains and needs, and then, after you've talked with these people, after you gather that information, you need to go back and sit down at your desk with your team, or around a table with your team, and test how your technology provides quantifiable value to those customers based upon what they've told you. You want to learn from the customer. You want to understand what their real issues are that they would be most motivated to pay to solve. And you need to determine whether your technology, your product or service, satisfies those needs, alleviates those pains. And the better you do that, and the better you tailor your product or service to alleviating those needs and pains, the greater the value is going to be to your customer. So, we're now going to stop for a few minutes. We're going to give you 5 minutes to think about who your customer is, and think about that as a person who's making the buying decision. And most importantly, what's the primary value that your conceived product or service provides to that customer? And as you think about this, there are a number of us here. I lost Jay. Jay?
He's talking to the Jerry outside.
Could you ask him to come back in, please, Rich? So there are 3 of us here who are going to circulate around and ask you what you're thinking. And if you have any stumbling blocks or questions, raise your hand and we'll be sure to come over. So Alexandra, over here, And is he,
He's on his way.
so
He's mid-sentence.
Jay will ultimately be in, but do you want to start the clock, Alex? And
So we'll be going around the room. If you have any
I'm back.
questions,
And
that's
then-
idea. That's Jay. over there.
and this is Jay.
Well, I have your attention, by the way. 2 meetings from now, the title is wrong on our thing. It's actually understanding reviewer criteria. What are the guidelines? What are they looking for? To determine if your proposal merits funding, by Carlos Gutierrez. It says it's something else, but the 3:45 meeting, that's the title. So come on back. Last thing. Thank you. So I'm ready.
So the idea is that you think about your customer, define that customer and the value to the customer, and then we'll have a little bit of a hearing exercise after that. So we'll be coming around the room and we have 5 minutes to do that. Raise your hand if you need anybody.
We're ready. Oh, you see this slide? And Jay.
No, but
Good to see you.
I'll give you one.
Okay, I just walked in and read the board, so I wasn't even here for the presentation. My customer is going to be anyone who uses the ladder to go onto a roof structure. And the purpose is to lock the ladder onto the structure. And this is my final, I hope, iteration. This.
Okay, so let's,
Okay.
wait,
Okay, good.
that's not
Okay.
what we want.
Okay, so tell me.
What is the value that provides to your customer?
They need to make sure that their employee or them as an individual, that they are safe when they transit from the ladder onto the roof
Yep.
or vice versa.
Okay,
That's it.
great,
Okay.
great. Okay, so your customer was clear. What does everybody think? Is ensuring safety
Yep.
in that situation
Value.
of value to the customer?
Yep.
Raise your hands. Is that? Yeah, I would tend to agree with that. So,
I would think it's limiting liability. You do
well,
that
that's,
when you-
but that comes out of it. That comes out of it. We're not here saying that this is the best value or the most important value. The question is just, have people identified values for their product or service as opposed to features of the product or service or the technology? So here, please.
We are developing medicated contact lens. So contact lens that will provide sustained delivery of drug. So our customer is optometrist, doctors,
Yes.
who are going to prescribe the lenses to the patient. So because it gives a better outcome for them compared to eye drops. So now is my customer doctor or the patient? Because the patient population is aging.
Okay, so your customer, well, it depends on how it gets produced, but your customer is the optometrist or the prescribing physician. Your customer is not this is, as I said when I introduced things, your customer is not the end user necessarily. So, okay, so we know who your customer is. What's the value that you provide to that prescribing individual?
Okay, so right now he writes a prescription. He doesn't make any money, pharmacist money. Now contact lens he can dispense and he makes the money.
Okay, so
then
it
he gets
increases,
better
so
outcome.
it increases his revenue.
Revenue, yeah.
Okay, what do people think? Is that a value? Yeah. Okay, great. I'm getting proof wrong here. Where?
Another example.
Yes.
So Sabi directs drivers to available parking spaces and manages parking for parking owners to maximize revenue. So customers, there's a two-sided market. So now our first customer is the driver that needs a space in, let's say, a large institution like UC Riverside. But now.
Okay, what's the value to that
So
customer?
the value for that customer is we help them save time by searching parking. So we provide that parking space to them in advance. Now you can reserve a space before you arrive and not have to search through a big parking lot. Wait, spend time
Okay.
parking.
Okay. What do people think? For the sake of the recording, I'm just gonna put, so it's, your customer is a driver who's looking for a parking space, and your value is that you're saving them time by, reserving or leading them to a parking space as opposed to having to search. Okay, so what do people think? Is that a value?
Convenient.
Yeah. So I think that one is really hard. It's not a clear-cut distinction.
It's a value if it's universal, but it's not a value if it's isolated to one segment of the parking market.
Yeah, and it also depends on how great the magnitude is. So, you know, if you're in a situation where there are plenty of parking spaces, it doesn't matter. So, I think that, yeah.
Active cities.
Yeah, no, I'm not saying it doesn't have value. I'm saying that the value varies. Okay, how about some others? Okay?
I've created a digital platform for managing harassment and discrimination. So on the customer side, the employee, there's a stigma with filing complaints. Well, created a system. Now there's a new law that everyone has to, if there's a complaint, companies have to investigate. For the companies, the value there is that it's efficient, transparent, and it's data-driven, metrics-driven.
Okay, so it's let me make sure I got this. So it is a complaint management or submission system?
Complaint and investigation.
Okay, and it wasn't completely clear, so what's the value to the employee?
I have two
Why is it?
customers, the employee is a customer,
Yeah,
right? So there's a stigma.
well, no.
Well, you
Yes,
use-
the employee's not gonna buy your system. So I don't think, the employee's a user, the employee's not a customer,
Okay.
right? I mean, the employee's
So
not
I'm
gonna.
working with two models, well, or social media where they actually there will be a customer pay through a premium service, so that, and then I also sell a platform to companies,
Okay,
right, so.
okay.
So if the company is your customer, then what is the value that you're giving that customer?
Well, it's an efficient system, they don't have to employees don't have to knock on HR door, they can upload and complain to the system, so it's efficient, it's transparent, and also, it's gonna reduce lawsuits and settlements.
Yeah, I mean, certainly, without a doubt, the last is the value to any company.
The first
Reducing
two,
liability.
yeah, the first two were features of your product. So transparency and easy to use, or I can't remember which one it was.
That is a value, the
Well,
efficiency is a value.
So the question is, Jay, the transparency and ease of use are features of your product that do potentially provide a value to your customer. But what would your customer say? What does the company gain? Because it's easy to use the system and it's transparent.
CYA.
Right, so, it's exactly what you said, that's it.
Okay, well, I mean, I would argue that if you talk to customers, they're probably more than that. That is one, but I bet there are more. But the point is that we all tend to express these things from our point of view. And what the customer cares about is their bottom line, their pains, their needs. So I'm not saying that the features of your product don't provide value to your customer. I'm just we're all trying to help you express those features as values to the customer instead of features of your product. So how about some more? Yes?
We provide cell tracking solutions to cell therapy developers and biopharma companies. to track sales once they are injected into the patient. So the customers are cell therapy developers in biopharma or academic labs. And the value that we offer is to reduce patients' risk, to accelerate their product development time to market, and reduce manufacturing costs of cell therapy products.
Okay, so again, tracking cells used in cell therapy. I would say that most of what you expressed as values were features. So, what does reducing manufacturing cost provide to the company? Why do they want to reduce manufacturing cost?
More profitability. And
Right.
business.
No, that's right, that's right. So the value to them is they're gonna make more money. Speeding up manufacturing is a feature. That's a way to get to making more money. So again, you know, you've got features that provide value to your customer, but to sell it to them, you need to speak in their language and from their needs.
Will the value always be money?
No, no,
So
does not have to be.
So in this case, when you say reducing patient risk is considered value to them or is it feature?
So reducing patient risk, is sort of on the cusp,
That's CYA
frankly.
also,
The value of reducing patient risk is reducing liability. So I guess from that standpoint, it's a feature, and the value that it provides is it reduces their liability, protects them. Okay, so there was another, yes?
Battery sensors to detect potential fires in electric vehicles or other things that have rechargeable batteries. So that's so a customer would be a battery manufacturer or a potential company that uses these materials like Tesla, electric vehicle manufacturers, or cell phone manufacturers. The value would be increased profit and safety.
Okay. So sensor for batteries, I would, so one of the things that complicates this kind of analysis is multiple customers. And I would guess that 95% of you potentially have multiple customers. And the fact of the matter is that every customer has to be analyzed independently, because each one potentially, and in fact generally, has different needs, different pains, different requirements. So when we teach this process, the way we do it is to ask participants to select one customer to start off with, to learn the process, to learn the analysis, recognizing full well that nobody can arbitrarily pick the best customer, the best beachhead customer. We can't, you can't, yes. But if you learn the process with one, you can then run the process with multiple and then build a matrix and say, well, this one's faster, but this one's worth more. So where do we go? Where do we start, and how do we sequence these? Okay.
I just want to make a quick point before we move on to the next example. You mentioned that your client was battery manufacturers.
Right.
A client should be brought down to the person level. And that's really important because you can only really understand the interests and the motivations and the needs of an individual, not of a company. And in large organizations, you might have multiple stakeholders that have some decision-making power, influencing power over the purchase of a product. So bring down the customer to the vice president of
CTO,
R&D, the
manager,
CTO,
yeah.
and that way you can really personify and understand, gee, what does that person care about? Because you're gonna be speaking in their language, so you need to get into their head as much as possible.
And that's a great point. And I was just focusing on values and not thinking about the customer enough. That's been true for a number of people who have identified their customers. And what it reflects is, at least in part, the degree to which you dug into the detail of the market you're thinking about selling into. So you need to understand whether it's a big battery company or a Tesla electric vehicle company or Apple and cell phones or Samsung and cell phones or whatever. You need to understand how those markets work and who it is that you need to influence. And
SME is called supply chain.
well, no. Supply chain presumes, supply chain may ultimately be part of it, but supply chain presumes that you're building something and moving it along. This is, what I'm saying is that you need to understand how your customer's business works. So, in the case, and I don't know how Samsung or Apple, any cell phone manufacturer goes about identifying the batteries that they use, or the battery management systems, or the sensor systems, or anything. But you need to learn how that happens so that you can make sure you've identified the needs of your customer. And that's going to vary. The cell phone manufacturer is probably going to be different from Tesla versus somebody else. Okay, so. Yeah.
Sorry, just to wrap up, one very useful tool to do that and understand your stakeholders is to draw a map of your ecosystem and map and put all those customers in there, who's gonna make the decision, who's gonna actually give money out, and put it in a piece of paper and understand the relationships between all of them, and that'll give you a very good understanding of the whole and what work needs to be done to truly be able to get this product to market.
So my customer are couples who are having trouble conceiving using IVF. IVF is not working for them. The value that I'm offering is having those couple access to a new method to help their own biological trial rather than adoption or other means.
Okay.
Yeah, so the value would be legacy or it's emotional.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, did everybody hear that? So it's a new approach
To
to fertilization,
Yeah.
fertility, and the value is emotional values associated with legacy, success at conception. What do people think? Is
the decision maker there actually the prescribing physician as opposed to the ultimate couple that are going to use the product?
The decision maker, well, the service provider will be the physician, yeah. But
who's-
ultimately, go ahead.
Who is your customer? Who is purchasing your service? So is that,
The fertility.
okay.
The customer is always the one paying the money, right?
Yeah.
You can have users.
Ultimately.
Yes, that's right, that's right, that's right.
So in a way, it's B2B to C kind of.
Yeah,
model.
yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, yeah. So again, you need to understand how those decisions are made at fertility clinics and who it is.
And our value is an additional alternative to the existing services that the company can provide. They can add that to the repertoire.
I would think it would have to be more than that. Just having another choice isn't necessarily a value.
Doesn't it increase
It ha-
revenue from increasing chats? Revenue, right?
Yeah, it's true.
I think the point is, it has to be better for some reason. I mean, just having, if this
Well,
works
she already
perfect.
said it's for people on whom it does, the previous
Oh,
voice that doesn't work.
okay,
then
so-
now it's better.
Yeah, as long as that's there.
You have to be a little careful. In healthcare, there's actually multiple payers and multiple buyers. So in some industries, it's a lot more complicated.
Well, yes, and I think in this case, she's right about her customer. you're also right, this is a regulated industry. And so to get it there, to be able to sell it, there are all kinds of other pieces to it. But in the end, even in a complicated regulated industry, if there isn't an end user who derives value from using it, and a customer who derives value from selling it, the rest doesn't matter.
And doesn't the physician have to admit failure before he refers?
Well, they know they didn't get pregnant, right?
Sorry?
They know they didn't get pregnant.
I said the physician, if the physician's gonna refer, he has to admit that he's failed at the IVF process. I know people have been 9 years trying to get pregnant. How much time do you lose before the doctor finally says, I can't do it?
Yeah.
And now you've
We're gonna
lost
run so
how many
many
years?
patient awareness campaigns
Yeah.
to make it public. Trust me.
You know, and
Okay,
what happens,
so
they end up having triplets.
we've only got a few minutes left, so I think we've covered a wide gamut of different customers, products, values, features here. Hopefully you've got an idea of what the struggle is here. I can tell you, I think Alex and Jay would agree, we've been teaching this stuff, Jay for what, 7 years? Something like that.
Yeah.
Me for on the order of 4 or so, Alex 3. This issue, what is the value of your product and who actually is your customer, the person, are the biggest challenges that people struggle with, particularly the value one. It's getting out of your head, getting out of your product, out of your technology into the customer and speaking the voice of the customer and the customer's value is really a challenge. But, so I just would like to talk a little bit more about how to actually do this. And, got 7 minutes. So everything that I'm going to show from here on in is stuff that we either use in our I-Core workshops or comes out of I-Core workshops. It's examples of the approach and how to gather this information and analyze it. So really what we're suggesting is what's been described as waterfall product management, executing on 2 no's. So the first no is the customer problem, understanding that problem. And the second one is making sure that you've defined features that provide value to that customer so that you can then actually produce it. Not surprisingly, or maybe surprising to some, this just goes back to what the main cause of failure is. More startups fail from a lack of customers than from a failure of product development. Companies don't fail in general because they can't make what they set out to make. They fail, study after study shows, because they make the wrong thing. They don't make a product that customers want to buy. So, before trying to sell, go out and understand the customer. Ask questions, validate, pivot, ask more questions until you come up with a product that has real value to your customer. Then you can go out and build a company and execute on it. Yeah?
Customer validation.
So that is validation of your hypothesis, your idea, your product with the customer. So you have an idea, you're going to go out, you're going to ask customers about it, or not trying to sell it, but ask about how they do it. You know, would something like this help? How much would this change how you do things? And then those answers are going to either validate or invalidate what your thoughts were. And if they validate it, you're gonna move forward. If they don't, you're gonna have to pivot and then come back and answer some more questions.
Thank you.
So this is the business model canvas. What we're talking, these are all components of, in essence, I could say, the modern business plan. So instead of many, many pages of text, these are the key components that one needs to define to build a business. Everything that we've been talking about this afternoon is here. It's in the number 1 boxes. And this, I would argue, Steve Blank would argue, many people would argue, is the place where you have to start. You have to understand the customer, you have to understand the values that that customer is looking for, and then move forward. So the first thing to do is identify the customer. The customer's not out there looking for something to buy. They're looking to solve problems, they're looking to do something. You need to figure out who they are, why would they buy, what do they need? And then from that, the question is, hey, does your product solve a problem for them? Does it alleviate a pain? Does it provide value? Yes?
Maybe it isn't solving the customer need so much as solving a user need. If you've got a situation where you have users, recommenders, and then customers are only people who change money and wholesale.
So you're correct, but no one's going to spend any money unless they perceive and/or know that there is some value to that. So I know Roger. So his product has the potential to increase employee well-being. And so I would say that the company is going to be motivated to pay for that product, even though they're not using it and they're not directly gaining benefit from it, because their employees are going to be healthier, they're going to be happier, they're going to be more productive, I don't know what. But in every case, it comes down to whoever is paying the bills, whoever the customer is, needs to see some value. And there are many, many cases where that value is being generated by pull-through from an end user who is not the customer at all. So you have to continually be testing your hypothesis. You're conducting informational interviews, you're learning about the customer, you're testing your value propositions, you're not selling. You're identifying the customer and their needs, you're testing the hypothesis, you're iterating, you're pivoting to support your business. So one of the resources that we suggest really strongly is a short ebook like Gift Constable, Talking to Humans. And as he says there, success starts with understanding your customer. So we'd also suggest that the last 2 questions you ask when you finish any of these interviews are, what haven't I asked you? And can you suggest another person for me to talk to? This is how you get away from cold calls and get warm introductions to get deeper into understanding. So, resources. You've heard a lot about EPIC SBDC and the SBDC Resource Center here at UCR. Scott Bropsky runs the SBDC. Misty Madero runs the SBIR STTR Resource Center. Here are some books that we think are valuable. In particular, the 3 on the left talk directly to Lean Launchpad, this process, and interviewing. And we're over time, but we have 5 minutes before the next presentation starts. I
The next
suggest,
presentation starts at 1:55.